Can you hear me? Where's Christine? I want to thank Christine. I worked with her at Google for having me. A little bit annoyed that I have to follow Gary, and a little bit annoyed that I'm the person standing between you and the cocktails. So my promise to you is no data, no analysis. You just sit back and listen. So I'm David Lee. I started my career when I was 35 years old. I don't know if Miriam Rivera is in the room. I started as an attorney in her group. As she will attest, I was a very mediocre attorney. So that goes to show you that there are many paths to venture capital. I eventually landed as the managing partner of SV Angel. During that time, I was very lucky, and I think a lot of the investors in this room were very lucky to be an investor during this time. I would argue that it was the greatest bull run in startup tech history in the past 30 years, mainly because there was one trend that fed us all, this whole idea of mobile, social, local. This trend was large enough to create enough companies that created outsized returns for a lot of funds. And the general idea was in a span of 3 years, mobile phone adoption in the US went from 25% to 85%. That is the definition of a tailwind. And so for us, there are a lot of great companies up here. I was very lucky to be a part of them. A lot of companies that aren't up there, but it was also a special time to be an investor. In 2016, I decided to start a firm with my partner, Zal Bilamoria, who's sitting over there. And the thought that we had and the observation that we had, Zal used to work at Andreessen Horowitz, was that we were seeing more and more founders work on these sort of fundamental human problems. So the whole idea, Gary mentioned Y Combinator, make something people want is their tagline. We saw more and more founders making something people need. So it could be in the area of health or genomics or ag tech or space. And so the general idea was, could you start a seed fund? Could the lean startup method apply to these startups? And our belief was that yes, you could see, and we saw more and more founder activity in these areas. And what was really exciting to me, and to probably to many in this room, and many of you have seen it in this panel, was this notion of many of these companies are sort of leveraging 0 to 1 technologies. So if you've read Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, he talks about these step functions. And you see a step function, it might be genomics, it might be microprocessors, it might be different technological breakthroughs that create whole new industries. And you see some of them up here. But I wanted to take you back to the original sort of 0 to 1 breakthrough. And that is part of the reason why a lot of us are sitting here. This person up here is William Shockley. So he invented the modern transistor. And by transistor, I mean a transistor that was encoded in a semiconductor, mainly silicon. And silicon, as we all know, is sand, so it's all around us. So he won a Nobel Prize for this research in solid state physics. Arguably, this is what created everything. It created why we're here. Funny enough, it also created, not only did it create the first set of technology or breakthrough technology in semiconductor design and therefore computing, in many ways it created this ecosystem that we're in today. This is a picture of what is known as the Traitorous Eight. This was the first group. These were students of Shockley who decided to jump out and start their own company called Fairchild Semiconductor. So in this picture, you have Eugene Kleiner of Kleiner Perkins. You have Robert Noyce, who went on to start Intel, where Andy Grove was a first employee. And you have Gordon Moore, who is the father of Moore's Law. And they left Shockley's group to start this company. Arguably, they are the founding fathers of Silicon Valley. From them, the company Intel was created. Once Intel was created, Microsoft was created, and so forth and so on. The modern computing revolution that in some ways didn't culminate in the mobile, social, local revolution, but led to that, that was started with this group. And what does that mean? That means, or what did that mean? Part of what that meant was this was a group that was geographically dense. This was a group that was located in one particular area. This is part of the reason why it's called Silicon Valley. In fact, Shockley, he moved out to Silicon Valley to take care of his ailing mom. He lived in New Jersey. So had he not done that, had one person not done that, we may have a completely different community. And so that hardwired some assumptions that we have today. It hardwired the idea that you have to be geographically close to your customers. You have to be close and in the same room as your other employees. As an investor, you have to be close to your portfolio companies. Because what companies like this did, they created an ecosystem of financiers, of funding. The VC community was created around companies like this, and we hardwired assumptions into our model, a model that in some ways could be breaking down at this point, strictly from the size of the funds and the amount of capital, the time to exit, a lot of the themes that we talked about here. So I want to fast forward 60 years. So some of you may know who this is. This is Vitalik Buterin. He wrote a white paper, the Ethereum white paper, and he arguably is a founding father of a 0-to-1 technology in crypto assets and Bitcoin and Ethereum. A lot of us may argue about the utility of Bitcoin, of cryptocurrencies. I don't think anybody in this room will dispute the fact that this is a computing breakthrough. This is a 0-to-1 breakthrough. The other founding person, or it, is Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know who that person is, or if it's a group of people, if it's a he, she, or they. And this is really important. Their initial condition, or their origin, is more distributed. It's not geographically dense. So I don't know Vitalik, but from all intents and purposes, he's a nomad. He lives in a suitcase. The Ethereum Foundation, it has a center in San Francisco, it has a center in Argentina, Israel, I think. If you look at some of the best projects in crypto, they're not all located in Silicon Valley. There are some of the best projects are in Asia, Israel, Argentina. That's really significant in our view, because these initial conditions, that small difference in an origin creates different types of assumptions. A second example of this is this chart here. This is a heat map of CAR-T clinical trials being held throughout the world. It's hard to see here, but not all of them are in the US. And this represents, and this speaks to some of the breakthroughs in biotech. I think one of the trends that we've all seen in this room in the last 18 months are founders who are getting funded with $2-3 million to start biotech companies. The buzzword is computational biology. In fact, yesterday, the people who invented immunotherapy, or a new way of treating cancer, they won the Nobel Prize in science, in chemistry. And so just looking here, this is just one statement. This is proof positive that innovation is happening everywhere. It's not one dense area. Anecdotal evidence as well. CRISPR, a lot of people have heard of this technology. Lots of buzzwords are particularly in the US. Part of the reason why it's a buzzword is because of regulation. It's hard to get clinical trials on humans, that might be redundant, in this country because of regulation. China, they are already conducting clinical trials. And in many ways, they're further along than we are in trying to explore this technology. So again, first time ever that the whole world is going 0-to-1 together in these technologies. And I would offer to you that this is a huge opportunity. I think it would be a waste if in 5-10 years, the technology landscape looked the way it did today. I think the people who start the companies should be different. The way these groups are assembled should be different. And most importantly, the people who fund these companies should look different, not just in form, but also in substance. And whether it's equitable or whether it's fair, this is almost by necessity, because the assumptions that we had the geographical density, those assumptions no longer apply. So, of course, because I'm a venture capitalist, I have to talk about one of our companies. This is Gaurav and Sean, and I feel like they personify a lot of what we're talking about. 50% of our companies are outside of Silicon Valley, not just San Francisco. Gaurav and Sean are in Houston currently. We went down there for Houston barbecue, highly recommend it. For a while, they were distributed, with Gaurav being in Philly. And basically what they did was, based on their research, Gaurav's a cancer biologist, Sean is a chemical engineer, and they came up with a new way of creating a new enzyme to create different types of peroxides. So for anybody who understands oil and gas or that industry, peroxides, it's an enormous industry, enormous market, and it's a huge sort of ingredient or input for a lot of cleaners and a lot of industrial uses. The problem is the way it's created is an environmental hazard, so that's another trend that we're seeing. A lot of founders deeply care about issues that go above and beyond their company. And so they came up with a way to computationally create new enzymes to create new peroxides in an old school Silicon Valley venture capital way. 10x price performance improvement. That's it. And so when you can do that, when your costs go down and your prices go down, but the performance goes up, that's when you have a huge opportunity. That's the history of technology investing. And they did this with less than $4 million. They built a bioreactor on less than $4 million. And so for us, they are sort of poster children, if you will, of the types of founders that I'm sure a lot of us in this room are meeting, or a lot of founders in this room, they are sort of poster children for some of the ideas that are being pursued. So that's something that's really exciting for us. So in sum, what I would say is initial conditions are different. The market is different. What the companies want from their investors is different. You heard Gary talk about how some of the old assumptions don't apply. So from my vantage point, this is something Zal and I think about. One thing we know for sure is that the world is not going to stay the same. The old way of funding these companies is over. And so we have to think about, where do we meet the customer being the entrepreneur? What does the entrepreneur want in this environment? And whenever I think of that question, and I still don't have any great answers, this is the person I think about. So you may have recognized the other people, maybe Shockley, probably Vitalik. I'm 100% certain you don't know who this is. That is not a picture of me sort of superimposed to age much later in life. This is my primary care physician, Dr. Ronald Su. So 5 years ago, I moved to LA. I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor, so I take my health very seriously. And so when I moved to LA, I needed a new primary care physician. And I asked all my fancy friends, some of the most powerful people in LA, some of the richest people in LA, who's your primary care physician? Independently, about 6 of them said Dr. Su. So I said, okay, he's the person. Turns out he doesn't take insurance, so you have to pay everything out of pocket. He's in this nondescript mall, and it was pretty underwhelming to see him. And so I saw him once, and then I said, okay, this is a sham. And so fast forward 3 months. I tweaked my back, I think, reaching for a magazine, like it was just some random injury, and my back was just bothering me. And I called him on a Saturday. I called his office, and I said, hey, I want to make an appointment with Dr. Su because I tweaked my back. It's not serious, not a big deal. So 15 minutes later, I get a call. It's 818. And so I pick it up, and I go, hello? And he goes, yeah, this is Dr. Su. And I go, oh, what are you calling me for? This is Saturday at 3:30. Sunny. I'm like, what are you calling me for? And he said 3 words, and the way he said it will always stick to me. He said, you're my patient. And he was completely present and there for me. And that human connection, that idea of customer service or the customer experience will never leave me. And that, I would argue, and I will never leave him. I will never go to another doctor. And that, I argue, is the most important, or a wedge or a way of differentiating oneself in this environment of so much change. You start with a customer, differentiate on customer experience, and that is the moat. That is a long-term advantage, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're an investor. The common rebuttal, though, and this is what other VCs say to me, is it doesn't scale. It's a great story. It's great that you connected with him. He sounds like a great listener. That doesn't scale. My counter argument to that is Amazon. So if you study Amazon, what did they start with? In every annual letter, they published their 1997 shareholder letter, which was arguably the most important sort of shareholder, more important than what Larry and Sergey wrote or what Zuck has written. And the reason why is he laid it out. He said, we're going to start with the customer experience. What do customers want? They want better selection, lower prices, faster delivery. So we're going to structure our whole company around that. Everything that we do is going to be designed around that. He was consistent since 1997. Since then, they've built some obvious long-term advantages, network effects, switching costs, economies of scale, but it all started with that. And so whether you're a firm, whether you're an investor, that, I believe, is the origin. That's the starting point from where you want to build a great organization. There's a great book that I read called Competing Against Luck, and it's written by Clayton Christensen. He wrote The Innovator's Dilemma that, you know, a lot of us in this room sort of cite when we say, oh, it's disruptive, it's like the innovator's dilemma. But basically, he lays a framework for this, and he talks about how focusing on, he talks about companies like Intuit, American Girl, how they've built long-term advantage around this. And I would argue in this age where there's you have so many competitors, everything's being automated, there's so much change, that focusing on the customer experience is the way to build a long-term advantage, whether you're a founder or investor. So with that, I want to say thank you, and enjoy your cocktails, and thank you for having me, 500 Startups.